Good morning. President Biden removes Canada from list of sponsors of terrorism, lifts sanctions on Cuba's military. He also lifted sanctions on companies run by Cuba's military and again suspended a provision in a law that allows Cuban Americans to seek compensation for confiscated property on the island. President-elect Donald Trump designated Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism shortly before he left office in January of 2021, 5 years after President Barack Obama removed it. Trump can reverse Biden's actions as soon as he takes office next week. Also, Biden's move comes on the heels of Cuba and Bolivia becoming partner countries of the group of emerging economies, or BRICS. Folks, as Bob Dylan wrote, for the times they are a-changin'. And also, you find any sense of irony as Trump will be inaugurated on Monday, the Dr. King holiday? Let's connect some dots.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they happen in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is American imperialism in this new era of Trump. For as crazy as his bloviating is, it's dangerous as well. For further insight into this, let's turn to my guest. He's the chair of the coordinating committee of the Black Alliance for Peace. He's an editor and contributing columnist for the Black Agenda Report, and he was the Green Party candidate for Vice President of the United States in 2016. Ajamu Baraka, as always, welcome back.
Glad to be back. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Before we get to the topic of American imperialism, I want to quickly get your take on another issue. House Speaker Mike Johnson confirms, this is from Politico, confirms, quote, discussions, end quote, on tying wildfire aid to the debt limit. He told reporters one option on the table is making a new tranche of disaster relief funding for the California wildfires conditional on agreeing to rise the debt ceiling. But many California Republicans, including Doug LaMalfa, said in a brief interview Monday, they may have no choice but to pursue that option, given the potential urgency around addressing the LA fires, paired with the reality of the nation could default on its borrowing authority in a matter of months. Ajamu, this to me, and folks, I have an incredible bias here since I am born and raised in Sacramento, California. But there's something that I think I haven't heard anybody in their analysis of this say the following. What seems to be getting lost in some of this analysis is trying to blame the Democrats for these fires in California and seeming to forget the John Birch Society was founded in Orange County, California. Ronald Reagan, the patron saint of the Republican Party, wasn't born in California, but considered California to be his home, was former governor of California. Richard Nixon retired in San Clemente, as Gil Scott-Heron famously said, and the rich go to San Clemente. So a lot of folks see California as the bastion of democratic politics, not understanding it's a very big state, and Northern California, yes, there's a huge Democratic base there, but you got a lot of Republicans. There are a whole lot of Republicans in Malibu. You know, y'all might be the boo, but you ain't in the boo. Pacific Palisades, white enclave. Malibu, white enclave. So many of these areas that have been burned to the ground. Whole lot of Republicans have lost their houses here. Ajamu.
It's really, it's almost as though they don't seem to understand that they're facing a serious legitimation crisis in the U.S. That there's a reason why so many people have lost faith in U.S. institutions. There's never been a situation that I know of in which disaster aid has been politicized or potentially politicized in this way. And even as you laid out in terms of the California being the home of some pretty right-wing libertarian elements, one of the key components of the libertarian creed is, of course, the limited government, but that the government or the state does have the responsibility to provide protection when the citizens face an emergency, a catastrophe that is of no one's fault, but nature or whatever. It's expected that that is the trade-off the one gets in being a part of a civil society. So this position that Mike Johnson is taking is radical in its implications and of course its content. And it doesn't bode well for the U.S. because if you begin to, if political struggle gets to a point where all boundaries are traversed, where something as elementary as providing support and aid to parts of the country facing a disaster, you're on a slippery slope to a process that I've been predicting, Dr. Leon, for quite some time, that as the U.S. continues to disintegrate, if you will, to decline, that it's going to spin apart. And when you have a state like California, that if it was a independent country, would be something like number 4 or 5 in the world, you can create the conditions that can cause both Democrats and Republicans to begin to question the relationship to the union. So this is a dangerous development that they're playing with, because I don't think that they are prepared to go that far. I don't think that the ruling elements, the ones who are really running things, are going to allow that issue to be politicized in that way. They want to increase the debt limits, no question about that, which is actually another sort of contradiction for this wing of bourgeois politics. Normally, they want to decrease debt, but this is a very dangerous situation, and I don't know, Dr. Leon, if people understand the full political implications of this kind of politicizing aid in this way.
And final point on this, well, 2 things. One, Mike Johnson is from Louisiana. I didn't hear Mike Johnson talking about this when Katrina hit Louisiana. I didn't hear some of the Republicans that have been talking about this are from Arkansas, or maybe it's Alabama. When the last hurricane hit either Arkansas or Alabama, they weren't talking about, we got to tie the aid to my particular state to some other legislative action. When the hurricane hit North Carolina last year, they weren't having this conversation. And the other point is, I would expect Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, they should be screaming about this. They should be holding press conferences saying, folks, look at what they're trying to do here. You elected these fools, and look at what I don't hear the level of pushback that I would expect to hear if, in fact, the Democrats are serious about anything.
Well, I think you're right. I suspect that one of the reasons why they have not elevated this to the level of intensity that you just laid out is because of what many people believe is the unlikelihood of that actually taking place. That is in essence sort of a Trumpian kind of threat, but that is so unusual and so dangerous in its future implications that they're not going to go through with that. But I think that you're correct that one of the issues that we point out that suggests to us that the differences between these two parties are not as severe as people believe is when you have situations like this emerge and you don't see a more strident response from Democrats. This is an opportunity to raise an issue, to raise the perspective around what is the responsibility, what is the role of government.
Hmm.
Democrats can be raising that, but because they have a uh, a contradictory approach to the issue of the state, they're not raising that issue because their donors are the same donors that also provide money to the Trumpian wing of the Republican Party, and both sides of that equation are opposed to more aggressive state intervention, regardless of the reasons.
And I realized I don't even think Mike Johnson was in Congress at the time that Katrina hit, but that was I was using Mike Johnson in that instance as a euphemism more than anything.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, um, so now been some very interesting developments, and I highlighted this at the top. Uh, Joe Biden removes Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. He's lifted sanctions on companies run by Cuba's military. And this comes on the heels of Cuba and Bolivia becoming partner countries of the group of emerging economies, or BRICS. Ajamu, as I said earlier, as Bob Dylan wrote, for the times they be a changing. Uh, your thoughts on these two moves, Biden taking Cuba off the list of state sponsors of terror, and Cuba and Bolivia joining BRICS?
Well, my position, Dr. Leon, is reflected in a couple of tweets that I shared yesterday. I know that many people are very are happy that this occurred, and I would be too if it was something that was permanent and something that indicated a real shift in U.S. policy toward Cuba. But what I said in my tweet was that this was a cynical move made by the Democrats. That this is something that could have taken place 3.5, almost 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Once they had to respond to the fact that the Trump administration in their last few days put Cuba back on that list. They would have had to go through the procedure, which could be quick. They reduced that very quickly and stayed in alignment with the policies that were articulated and carried out under the under the Obama administration vis-a-vis Cuba, but they chose not to, and so they wait until the last few days of their administration to make this move to declare what everybody in the world knew, and that is there's no connection between the Cuban Revolution and so-called terrorism. They could have done that a long time ago, but they do it knowing that there's unanimity among the ruling class vis-a-vis Cuba, and that is going to be reversed by the Trump administration. That to me is the height of cynicism, man. And we shouldn't give any, in my opinion, we should not give any credence or any enthusiasm to this. I mean, people claim it's a victory of the people. What partially because we struggled to have this happen, but it's not really a victory of the people, in my opinion, Dr. Leon, because it's still the ball's still in the court of the ruling element that is using this to manipulate the people for their own particular ends. So, it's unfortunate that this is playing out in this way, but it's reflective of the kind of degenerate politics that are the dominant form of politics in the U.S. today. Now, in terms of Cuba and Bolivia being partners of BRICS, that's important. Um, and as BRICS begins to uh, uh, develop more its feet, is grounding in terms of any real sort of oppositional energy vis-a-vis the West, then that would be even more significant as we go forward. But it does reflect, the shifting uh, uh, stances of power globally that, these countries and BRICS in particular can continue to develop themselves even when they know they're facing significant opposition from the powerful forces represented by the U.S. And Western Europe.
You know, I think everything you said is absolutely right. I believe that the move on behalf of Biden to remove Cuba from the state sponsor of terror list is nothing but cynical. The question becomes, well, why this? Why now? But I also believe, though, that with the irony is that uh, Cuba becoming a member of BRICS now negates what is anticipated to be, oh, Trump will just reverse this on the 21st of January, the day after he takes office. That being in BRICS now makes that move by Trump less significant because this now ties Cuba to the economies of China, of India, of South Africa, of Russia, of Iran, of Venezuela, and so many other countries. And also, it makes the Cuban ports of Havana, of Matanzas, of Manzanillo. It makes those ports now international ports.
Well, potentially, yes. One of
Okay.
the things about the whole BRICS phenomenon is that there's a lot of potential there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it remains to be seen to what extent these countries are going to be able to circumvent the embargo that has multiple levels.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, if the removal of the label of being a state sponsor of terrorism holds, that would be much easier.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's quickly reversed, we have to remember that puts in place a lot of restrictions on the part of capital investment, trade relations, that many of these states, even though they're part of BRICS, are going to be very reluctant to attempt to circumvent.
Okay.
There's these secondary, sanctions that can be applied to them. So while BRICS again is a very important development, we have to remind ourselves that the U.S. still has enormous international economic power and influence, and so if these countries were prepared to circumvent those restrictions to really provide significant support economically to Cuba, it'd be a game changer. I'm a little less enthused about that happening anytime soon than others, perhaps.
Do you see Trump? And this is just your prediction because I think your crystal ball is probably still in the shop. Do you see Trump on Tuesday or Wednesday with the big red pen reversing Trump reversing Biden's move on the state sponsor of terrorism issue?
I see that happening, not necessarily on day one. They have
Mhm.
other sort of priorities, but I suspect it would be very soon. In fact, I'm curious to see what Mark Rubio says in his confirmation on that topic, because we all know that he is a anti-Cuban revolution hawk. So I think we'll get a good indication of where the administration will be on that issue when his confirmation hearing begins. But I suspect unless something is shifting that we cannot identify yet, that which means that there are some elements connected to the Trumpian forces that see some investment opportunities. If that has happened, then we might see that designation may not be applied immediately. But I suspect that even for those forces who see an opportunity for doing business in Cuba, I think that those other forces in the administration and in the deep state that sees the Cuban revolution as a threat to the entire region, I think that their interests and their positions may prevail. But who knows?
In fact, I'm glad you brought up the business issue or interests here, because when President Obama removed Cuba from that list, I saw that as a move to placate a lot of agribusiness, because there's a lot of chicken to be sold in Cuba. There's a lot of pork to be sold in Cuba. There's a lot of beef to be sold in Cuba. So just strictly from an agribusiness perspective, I saw a lot of business interests, not to mention tourism and the airlines and the cruise industries. So I found it interesting with Donald Trump claiming to be a businessman, and I say claiming to be because anybody that can bankrupt a casino, I don't know how good of a businessman you are, but I found that to be an odd move by Donald Trump.
You know, but it's kind of consistent in a way. Because I agree that there is definitely some interest, business interest in the U.S. that will love to be able to penetrate the Cuban economy and to exploit, Cuban labor, et cetera, et cetera. But I suspect that those larger geostrategic interests that the U.S. has prevail. But I think that even if with saying that, I think in some ways, Dr. Leon, the strategy of the Obama administration in terms of opening up Cuba for U.S. investment and other investment from Western capitalist countries was a more sophisticated strategy to undermine the revolution than the other way around. If you
I'm
open up
sorry.
Cuba
Start
and
that
you
sentence again.
encourage
Start that sentence again, please.
that the strategy for undermining the Cuban Revolution by encouraging the economy to be open to U.S. and Western capitalist investment and trade could have a more deleterious impact on the Cuban Revolution than the alternative, which is maximum pressure.
Right.
Much more sophisticated and potentially more effective. So, again, this is connected in my mind to the reluctance on the part of powerful forces to see any kind of success of the Cuban process in our region and really in the world. They want to crush the Cuban Revolution.
In fact, I'm glad you made that point, because I had been saying for years that if the American elite were truly concerned about the threat of the Cuban Revolution, then the answer to that is, if you really want to neutralize the communists in Cuba, then allow there to be trade with the island. Allow those folks to get a true sense of the benefits of the thriving economy, and let them see the United States as a friend as opposed to a foe. And over time, kill them with kindness. But what I see the motivating factor here to be more than anything, as it relates to be between whether it's Barack Obama or Donald Trump, was the Republican Party. And I think that Trump was playing to the Marco Rubios of the world and to the other ultra conservative, particularly Cuban Americans, as opposed to Barack Obama, I think, playing to their children.
Well, but their children are basically along the line you just laid out. They want to see more openness. In fact,
That's my point.
Yeah.
That's my point.
And,
Because when you look at the demographic breakdown of the turnout, the voting turnout for both Obama elections, he carried Florida winning the hearts and minds of the children of the Cuban refugees, not their parents. That was my point.
no, and I agree. And that's why it didn't make sense for the Trumpian forces to reverse that. But that shows you that
Unless they're
politically,
playing to the parents.
yeah, but the parents, in terms of a voting demographic, as you just
Right.
laid out,
Oh, you're
they're
right.
decreasing.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're
So
right.
the only explanation then has to be to look for it someplace else. I suspect that someplace else is in the deep state that does not want to see any kind of real progress at all, capitalist or socialist, in Cuba. And so even though, they're going to upset the Cuban American base in Florida, upset some business sectors in the U.S., the larger geopolitical considerations outweigh all of that. That's
Mhm.
their calculation. And as we both said, is a calculation that's not very sophisticated, because they're not reading the world correctly, and they're not really reading their own experiences. What do I mean by that? As you said earlier, Dr. Leon, if you had an economy in Cuba that began to be more capitalistic, what is the outcome of that? You have you reestablish and empower, if you will, at least economically, a new class force, a local bourgeoisie, if you will, a local capitalist class. Now, the Cuban Communist Party can deny them political power to a certain extent for a while, perhaps, but you have now a powerful force that can engage in some anti-revolutionary activity. And so, from the point of view of the U.S. that seeks to foment that kind of chaos in order to destabilize the revolution, that would have been a fantastic strategy. But they misread their own understandings of how they have destabilized other countries, and then misreading, in fact, the world.
Pittsburgh Dude 87 says, he says, maybe if the Cuban government allows the Donald to build the Trump Havana hotel, the sanctions will be lifted. But then he goes on to say, and I think this is really interesting. Wait a minute, where did it go? Would Ajamu argue that the Chinese or Vietnamese revolutions have been undermined by foreign investment?
That's a very interesting question. Now, if you're asking me, Ajamu, I would say that the two situations are a little different. Now, for the Chinese, I think they've been able to control and contain
Mm-hmm.
the sort of capitalist process, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
They had a strategy for how to build the Chinese economy that called for for partnerships with capital, while they maintain the dominant control in various state enterprises, was important for them, and while they allow for some degree of external investment, they did not surrender their economy to these outside forces. Therefore,
Don't they
the
call it
economic
capitalism with Chinese principles? Isn't that what they call it?
Chinese characteristics, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So they retain political power within the context of the Communist Party, and they engage in economic development, and they believe that they are on the track toward a more robust socialist project. Now, for Vietnam, though, it appears to be even though they're committed to socialist development, there seems to be the economy is not as strong as of course the Chinese. It's a
Mm-hmm.
different reality, and therefore the kinds of class forces developing in Vietnam are forces that can very easily, and have already done so to a certain extent, in my opinion, not reverse the Vietnamese process or revolution, but has definitely taken it off track, in my opinion. Okay, I've been to Vietnam for twice in the last few years, and I've seen that in terms of the kind of class power being developed with this new bourgeoisie, if you will, is very threatening to any kind of authentic socialist development. The young people in Vietnam, all they want to do is come to the West, or if they stay in Vietnam, they want to consume
Hmm.
like Westerners. So it's a complex and a multi-leveled sort of contradictory process in both
Shelley H.
places.
Shelley H says, I'd rather see BRICS influence in Cuba than USA culture is poison. Along that line, just to finish, I had meant to ask you this question about the Cuban Revolution. Is also one of the concerns of neocons in this country, the influence that a progressive Cuba, a economically progressing Cuba might have on Haiti.
On Haiti and the entire region, yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's one
Mm-hmm.
of the reasons why they are not going to allow Haiti to be fully liberated if they can. Because for us, Haiti is key in the Caribbean and in the entire Americas and Puerto Rico. So yes, the Cuban success will be replicated, or people will attempt to, in fact, replicate what is developing in Cuba. Cuba has a lot of prestige throughout our region and throughout the world, but in particular in our region. We talk about in our region, we're talking about the Americas. So no, they want to undermine that. The same reason why they've been targeting Venezuela. They're targeting Venezuela because of the key role it was playing in the region and its economic independence, if you will, was such that they were using their resources to facilitate revolutionary developments throughout the region. And as Trump said vis-a-vis Iran, he said he bankrupted Iran. Therefore, it was very difficult for it to support its so-called proxies. Um, the idea with targeting Venezuela was, in essence, to bankrupt Venezuela so that it can no longer continue the Petro-Carib project with Haiti and with other countries in the region, providing them oil under market value so that they can develop. So it was it is a regional strategy to undermine the socialist project in Venezuela and to undermine the ideal of socialist development in the region and really around the world.
Donald Trump has come out and said he wants to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. He has stated he wants to use military force to reclaim the Panama Canal. He wants to annex Greenland, which is the sovereign property of Denmark. He's talking about annexing Canada and making Canada the 51st state. None of this stuff we know can really happen. But this jingoistic militarism and rhetoric is incredibly inflammatory and incredibly dangerous. What does this say to you, Ajamu Baraka?
It says that we are in a very dangerous period of what I refer to as a Hosbian state of nature, where there's no rule of law.
Mm-hmm.
There's just the rule of the most powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, and because of the acceptance of might makes right as the principle on the part of so many people in the U.S., then the Trump forces and others who agree with them but are not going to verbally say so, they're allowed to make this to engage in this kind of rhetoric, and actually may even make some of those moves. Now, I don't believe that they're going to attempt to physically reimpose themselves on Panama and retake the canal. I do think that there's a route for them to be able to put pressure on Denmark to purchase, quote unquote, Greenland. I think that is something that people need to follow very closely, because that, in fact, could happen. But the other things that they've been playing with, I think, are just rhetorical games. But why? I will argue, Dr. Leon, that this kind of rhetoric and this kind of theatrics, including what would be a continuation of various kinds of cultural wars, will be front and center during the Trump administration, because they have nothing else. There's no real alternative politics being represented in the Trumpian world and the Trump administration. This is particularly the national wing of the bourgeoisie that's in power now under Trump. That's why, this notion of the Gulf of Mexico and all these kind of jigonistic and pro-nationalist rhetoric is theater. It's theater, but it can be effective theater as long as you have the kind of weak opposition, political opposition that we have in the United States of America. I don't hear you.
I'm sorry. So the first point here is, if there were any type of discussion about a military move on Greenland, what folks need to understand is Denmark is a member of NATO. So Trump would be making a Nord Stream move, and what I say is, when I use Nord Stream, the United States blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which was a joint venture between Russia and Germany. Germany is a NATO ally. So really, the United States attacked a NATO ally. What Trump would be doing is attacking a NATO ally. Now we're talking about an Article 5 problem for NATO. If he were to, in fact, to try to strong arm Denmark as it relates to Greenland. And if you actually tried to buy Greenland, first of all, how do you evaluate, or how do you place a value on Greenland? And Mike Johnson, if you can't help rebuild California because of a debt ceiling problem, where do you get the money to buy Greenland? Hence, connecting the dots.
You're right. And then the way that happens is basically, one, I think you laid out correctly the political contradictions of using military force to acquire Greenland. That's not going to happen, and not even necessary, because it would raise those kinds of issues. I mean, it would completely delegitimize the opposition to the Russian special military operation. Okay, if you have the U.S. engaged in the same kinds of quote unquote aggressive actions, that's not going to happen. And in terms of what Greenland might be valued at, in terms of it being purchased, that's all part of a negotiation process. And of course, with a bully like Trump and the ability of the U.S. to in fact put pressure on Denmark, who knows what might be arrived at. So this is, as you said earlier at the top of the show, these are some interesting questions in a very interesting time, and nothing can be completely dismissed, especially since there appears to not be any restraints on U.S. power, especially among the U.S. population that seems to be prepared to go with some of the most egregious criminal activity that we've ever seen from any states, at least since the end of the Second World War.
With these distractions being, and renaming the Gulf of Mexico, well, Donald Trump could do that in the context of American maps, but in terms of international recognition of such a change, that's just crazy talk by a crazy man. Because the United States does not control the entity, the hydrographical international agency, or whatever the heck the thing is called. So that would not result in international recognition of such. And the thing's been called the Gulf of Mexico for over 400 years. But so these distractions, are these indications to you of a bigger problem or bigger potential problem within the MAGA movement itself, as we look at Steve Bannon and his fight with Elon Musk over the H-1B1 visa program?
Well, you know, it's interesting because that issue of the visas is a concrete issue that has to be that they're going to have to struggle through, and has enormous implications for their internal politics. This other thing with the renaming of the Gulf is what I refer to as performative. This is political theater meant to divert attention, to focus attention on these kinds of nonsensical issues, in order for the people who voted for Donald Trump not to notice that Donald Trump has been unable to, in any substantial material way, to change their realities. And it is inevitable for that to happen, because what the people are experiencing is not the policies of the Biden administration versus the Republican administrations. It is the contradictions, the limitations, the shortcomings of a dying economic system that's unable to address the objective material needs of most of the population here in this country. You know, and as long as you have a ruling class in which the people are manipulated and not fighting for their own material needs, then you don't have to worry about people looking around and saying, we got people who are living in the streets. We got people who haven't had real increases in their salaries in years. While we had runaway inflation, we can't afford to eat the way we used to just a couple of years ago. But yet they can come up with all kinds of resources to send off to support their wars in Ukraine and in Gaza. So these are the kind of things they don't want people to really focus in on. So you divert them to transgendered issues and the Gulf of America, and all of these kinds of issues. And you hope that they don't realize that basically, the economy, the economic relationships that have to be fundamentally altered are still in place. And as a consequence, their lives are still characterized by extreme precarity.
And using Guy Standing's book, The Precariat, which I strongly suggest people read. Final point: the Democrats aren't offering anything either. Kamala Harris offered nothing, and
Exactly.
and the things that she did offer were really vaporware, or all sizzle and no steak. A $25,000 tax credit for first-time home buyers. There were conditions on that thing that were going to have to take place before that was going to be a number of houses had to be built before that was going to kick in. And all that was going to do, by the economists that I've talked to, was raise the price of a house by $25,000. Trump is basically plundering the piggy bank in order to give further tax cuts to the wealthy, offering hardly anything for the rest of the country, and the Democrats aren't offering anything either.
Not only that, and all this tax hustle. What happens with the Democrats is they allow the Republican forces, in this case the Trumpian forces, to be the front persons on reducing taxes for the billionaires. They will pretend to be in opposition, but they won't. They know that the numbers are there to have another tax reduction for the billionaires. and they know a few Democrats will make sure that that happens, while they can pretend to be opposed to it. But both parties are pursuing and protecting the interests and the agenda of the oligarchy in the United States of America. So no, they have nothing to offer, and that's why the Democrats lost also. Both parties are bankrupt when it comes to addressing the economic contradictions of capitalism. And that's why many of us who are in fact socialists believe that we could put on the table now some serious conversations around what kinds of reforms need to be pursued, what type of structural changes need to happen for us to be in a place where we can begin to satisfy the real needs, the needs for dignity, the material needs of the vast majority of the people here in this country. You know, to have a right to food and housing and health care and education, you know, and a clean environment, you know, job training and real social security. You know, these are the kind of things that people deserve and people want, and they should be making demands over. So, you know, at this point, capital is unable to convince people that it's still in their interest to support it. Therefore, you have all these diversions.
And I'll make this final point. A number of the things that you just articulated, people will say, well, we can't afford them. Yes, we can. All you have to do is look at the budget and understand that budgets are numeric representations of priorities.
Exactly.
And so there's plenty money. There's plenty money. It's just a matter of folks deciding where that money wants to be spent. Brother Ajamu Baraka, man, thank you so much for your time today. Greatly, greatly, greatly appreciate that insight and analysis, and look forward to having you back.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hey, folks, thank you all. We really need to get to 10,000 subscribers. So we really need you all to help us get there. We can't do this without you. We do this for you, but we can't do this without you greatly. So if y'all could reach out to your friends, reach out to your family, direct them to this program. We're doing everything we can to bring it as strong as we can every single day. Thank you all, those of you that participated on the chat side. Greatly appreciate that. And as always, again, we are just so appreciative of your support, but we really need to get to 10,000, and we can't get there without y'all. Thank you so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned. New episodes every day, Monday through Friday. Follow, subscribe, leave a review, share the show, get us to 10,000. We need the contributions as well. Follow us on social media. All the links you'll find in the show description below. Remember, this is where the analysis of culture, politics, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.